So welcome back, everyone. This has been a little bit of a longer break because of Christmas, and I really hope you were able to relax a little bit and had also some nice times, but also, of course, that you worked on your homework and your homework games. So I'm looking forward to play your games, hopefully really soon. We are getting closer and closer to the deadlines, no pressure. So, to actually start the lecture, so welcome to the Game Design and Game Development lecture. This is the 9th lecture. This is the lecture from the TU Graz in Austria. You find all these course slides and everything on gamelabgraz.com. And yeah, if you have any questions, please feel free to talk with us, to chat with us, raise questions in the chat. And yeah, there we go. So, one topic which I would like to just throw at you very quickly, we'll just go over some points, because even though you really should know that, and I know that most of you are working with Unity, I just want to repeat some of the most important elements in terms of which that should be avoided to keep a good performance on Unity. So, before I start, what tool in Unity would you use in order to look a little bit at your performance? What do you use already? I'm waiting for the chat a little bit now. Any thoughts? The task manager, oh wow. Debug log, aged up. I feel, oh yeah. Feel free to continue the discussion on Microsoft. The profiler, yes. This is what I was aiming for. Thank you so much. So there are like plenty of ways, of course. There are also other tools out there, and also as we like tools not by Unity, but which you can use from Windows and so on and so forth. But the tool which is very, very handy, which comes from Unity, is the profiler. And this is like super important. Please use the profiler for your assignments, for your games, because it really tells you where you are spending what resources. So the moment you have any problems with also if you don't have any problems with performance, always use the profiler to see where you're dropping frames, to see what is happening and going on. And what you can really do, you can really check very, very lovely where you're losing stuff, where you do have problems, and especially also what is responsible. You can see, is it part of CPU, GPU, rendering, memory allocation, audio problems, and so on and so forth. And the nice thing is, you can go so far that you know exactly what part of your code is actually causing this problem. So this is like a super handy tool, and you can immediately find out, maybe I should not have used this for loop in my update function. So this is definitely one of the major tools. Then, and this is basically coming directly from the Unity manual. Please do use the manuals, whether you're using Unity or Unreal. They are really, really, both are written very well and really trying to support you in the best way to create the best games in your capabilities. And here, just this one example, there's an entire list on the Unity page how you can actually optimize the performance, or in this case, optimize the graphic performance in your game. Very quick question in the chat before we go on. Who already used the profiler? 1 is I did, 0 I did not. A little bit, some. Okay, can I So everyone who is currently working on a Unity project, once I'm done with this lecture, please go open Unity, look for the profiler, and you'll be super excited and happy what tool you were missing and how powerful this can be. Okay, so just again, this is basically just some ideas. Whatever other ideas you have for optimizing performance, please go crazy in the chat, add your own ideas. This is about helping each other. And this list is far from complete, just giving you some ideas. So for instance, for optimizing graphics performance, what other ideas do you have around that? There are common bottlenecks and ways to check for them. So often GPU is limited by fill rate or memory bandwidth. So what you can do, this is probably the way to solution for many of us, whether we are developing or playing games, lower the display resolution and run the game. If a lower display resolution makes the game run faster, you may be limited by the fill rate on the GPU. This is a good way to find this out. The CPU is often limited by the number of batches that need to be rendered. So you can check the batches in the rendering statistics window. The more batches are being rendered, the higher the cost of the CPU. If you have any other ideas, again, there are like plenty of websites helping you with them. These are just some ideas to help you. Frame debuggers, very nice. Thank you, Said. And also, like, would be great to hear more of your ideas how to optimize graphics performance in the chat. So next we'll look a little bit at the CPU optimization. So something which is nice that you can combine close objects together. You can do this either manually or you can use Unity's draw call batching. You can also use fewer materials on your objects by putting separate textures into larger textures atlas, for instance. And you, in general, can use fewer things that cause objects to be rendered multiple times. Things like reflections, shadows, per pixel lights, those are things which are really expensive. So if you see that you might run into issues, those are things where you can try to start for looking for. Yeah, sometimes you have to unfortunately get eventually rid of things which do look nice but are draining a lot. GPU optimization. Don't use any more triangles than necessary. So this is something which is super important. This is like very often like one of the major problems. If you have this fancy 3D game and then you have those giant objects, worst case scenario, you created this nice photogrammetry model, right? And then you just put it into the game and you think everything will be fine, but it has, I don't know, how many triangles? This might not work. There are plenty of lovely ways to actually limit the number of triangles in your objects. So also, I think also in Blender, there are some tools which help you automatically minimizing the triangles. So try to really keep the objects as simple as possible. Sometimes I'd see a cube in an environment and the cube has way more triangles because I don't know what happened there, but you can really try to limit the number of triangles here. Also, try to keep the number of UV mapping as low as possible. Bake stating lighting, just one. Using compressed textures, LOD systems, real-time shadows. So those are typical things which really drain. There's this really lovely documentation sheet on Unity and which has a sort of a to-do list. And this doesn't really matter whether this is Unity or this is any other engine. This is something which you can probably apply to any game. So this is like a little bit of a simple checklist to make your games faster. Things like keep the vertex count below 200k. If you're using built-in shaders, pick ones from the mobile or unit category. Keep the number of different materials per scene low. That's what we just said. Set a static property on a non-moving object to allow internal optimizations like static patching, and so on and so forth. And I mean, there are lovely, like really lovely tools in game development. So things like occlusion culling and so on, which already come with the engine. So things like these involve, for instance, and again, you don't have to implement this yourself. This comes with the engine. This means that, okay, if this is the player, and now you have this, I don't know, really lovely environment. Okay, I'll just need to enhance my drawings. Okay, this is the player. And now you have this really lovely environment ahead. And you have trees here, you have trees there, there are some lovely clouds, there are some other players, some NPCs or whatever. Okay, so this is the environment ahead. But you don't really need to see everything. So some neat tricks, again, this is what engines like Unity and so provide you with. For instance, if I know, okay, this is a lot of stuff to render, something which can help here is, for instance, that you draw some visual barrier here, like for instance, a wall, and okay, the player can see now everything which is on that side, does not see those things, and all those elements are not being rendered. So this is something which is, yeah, quite handy. If all of a sudden like a giant part of your map is not like rendered immediately, because it's invisible to the player. And the moment the player comes here, then those things are rendered as well. And of course, this does save a lot. You can also be smart with the game design, for instance. If you have a huge environment, but you don't have the power that everything is rendered at once, you can also make smart game and design choices, what the player actually sees at what point. Yeah, well. Just again, a few I here. Oh, something which is like super important are also skyboxes. So for instance, people immediately think when I say a skybox that this will be this, I don't know, this atmospheric sky environment where you see the sun and the clouds and this is something really distant. A skybox can be also within a room, giving you some perspective. It can be also something like a lot of buildings, something within a room, and so on and so forth. So skybox is not limited to literally the sky with some clouds and so on. Yeah, well. So this was just a little bit the topic to push you more towards performance. So of course, we will not judge your games only on performance, but when we see that you are dropping all your frames, it will be not the nicest experience, neither for the players nor for you developers. So performance is something which is just key, and very simple things. Which are still done very, very often is, for instance, that you put everything into the update function. The update function is something which is called so many times. Please do not, I don't know, create new objects all the time. Really be smart about what you put into an update function and so on and so forth. So those are all things where you can really save. Make some good performance steps. So, accessibility. This is also a topic which is like very, very important. The topic of accessibility is often overlooked. This means sometimes we can make our game so much more accessible with just a few tweaks. Make it nicer for people to play, easier for people to play, and especially not exclude people just by a few not so smart game design or artistic design choices. What do I have here? Yeah, there's pretty much only one website I wanted to show you here. So when I talk about game accessibility, there we go. I hope you can see my screen nicely. There we go. This website, Game Accessibility Guidelines, I'll quickly post this into the chat, gives us a really wonderful overview to make your game more accessible, more inclusive. And actually, when you look at this list, I wouldn't say this is like limited to games. There are so many things which you can also apply for website design, software design. This is a very, very powerful list. And again, there are simple things. If you think of accessibility, this does not necessarily need to include fully blind players, for instance. You already exclude people, for instance, through not so good color choices, because according to some stats, it's, I don't know, almost 1 out of 10 men are colorblind, if I get this correctly. So this is a huge number. Let me quickly open this one in a new there we go. Okay. So and then if you know those basic things, just making sure that you pick colors which are easy readable and which not involve like the typical colors for color blindness and so on and so forth. You are including a lot of players who you might have excluded by chance. And you have different levels here on this list. So you have basic, so simple considerations on design choices, intermediate, advanced, and like the full list. And again, I would really like to see, especially in the assignment, that everyone takes a look at the basic guidelines, because those are really simple considerations where I'm very, very, very sure that they can be implemented very easily. It also comes with this really lovely Excel sheet download. Maybe I can show you that too. There we go. This is how this looks like in Excel. Here are like the basic guidelines for motor, and yeah, then you can directly there. And so you can go through this list and say, yes, this is relevant, this is relevant, this is not relevant, and then you can check, did you implement that? Let me give you now a few examples. Before I start, I'm just curious, who of you has already heard of this website, Game Accessibility Guidelines? Okay, so let's look at some of them. For instance, in the motor, so you have different things to consider. So there might be people who have accessibility issues in the field of motor, cognitive, vision, hearing, speech, and in general ideas how to improve the accessibility of the game. So motor, for instance, just imagine, very, very simple. You lost one finger. You maybe lost your thumb because of an accident. Just one simple example. And one thing which sounds very it sounds very like easy to implement, but can be a life changer, is that you allow the controls being remapped. So do I have a controller somewhere? I think so. There we go. Just imagine. Okay. Again, this scenario, I might be. Okay. So. Just this scenario, for instance, I'm missing one thumb, and all of a sudden you're expecting the player to use all the time the A button, even though if I'm playing like that, the Y button might be more handy for me. Or again, for instance, if you do use those things, or if I'm required, or if I want to play just with one hand, and how can I then play the game? You will be like really surprised how many fantastic ways people found to play games also without any specific accessibility features. I mean, there are blind players beating other players with in games like Need for Speed. So this is crazy. But again, you can make it so much easier, for instance, that you allow the remapping of the control scheme, that instead of the A button I can use for jumping the Y button. And this does not only make accessibility so much nicer. Just think of FIFA versus Pro Evolution Soccer. Like FIFA and Pro Evolution Soccer, they always had this this fight between like, hey, what is the good control scheme? And they're like differ a little bit. But as a FIFA player, if I need to play Pro Evolution Soccer, I at least want to remap the controls to play the way I do in FIFA. Just as an example. Okay. Then things like adjust the sensitivity. Again, this is like can be a huge difference. For instance, if I cannot control it super well, that I don't need to use a very, very soft sneaking thing here. This doesn't need to be like included. There's a guy playing Dota with this chin. Yes, it's fantastic to see. But again, those things need remapping options and some aid. Slider for haptics and so on and so forth. Then cognitive, clear language, clear text formatting, easy readable default font size, avoid flickering images and so on and so forth. If you need them, give warnings. Vision. What do we have here? An easy readable default font size. Make it possible that someone can change the font size. Use clear text formatting. Avoid like a low contrast between the text and the background. So really try to have a strong background here. There we go. Hearing, provide subtitles. Sounds easy. Many games, especially if you're quickly creating something, just forget about subtitles. Avoid, like, be able that you can set the music, the voice, and the background sounds, that you provide different volume levels for those. Good. Something which is like in general important. Again, this is whether we talk about accessibility or just in general game design, game experience, it is really, really a good choice to provide different levels of difficulty. That you provide an easy mode and hard mode for those players who want to have a challenge. But there might be players who just want to enjoy the game and might be not professional esports players. And then there might be people who cannot even play the game if it's getting harder, but they still might want to play the game. And if you then use, even though like I think it was Wolfenstein, they made a little bit fun of players who played in the easy mode with I don't know, trying to embarrass them. But again, don't do that, because there might be some players who cannot play your game in a different way, and they don't want to be offended because of that. There are also really lovely tools, for instance, for vision. I'm just checking if I find the... Okay, those are already like more advanced version options to adjust contrast. So I think for color blindness, there are specific tools which give you then an overview how your tool, color blindness tool, let me quickly see if I can find this. If anyone knows what I'm talking about or has a link, please let me know. But basically tools which sort of give a layer onto something, which sort I think like some sort of a like color blindness simulator. I'm not entirely... Ah yeah, there we go. I think this is something like this. There we go. Okay, whatever. So here you can, for instance, drag and drop a screenshot. And then you can see, okay, this typically, okay, red wig, blue wig. What is, I think, the most... Is it the green blind one? Okay, but here you can sort of simulate how the different typical views do look like. That you sort of get an understanding. Oh, here you have so many different colors, but here it looks pretty much all the same. So if this is an important game design element, whether they are going for the yellow or the orange, and all of a sudden all of it is green, then one cannot play your game. Not good. Okay, so performance, accessibility, those are things which I would really love to see a little bit but considered in your games, because both are just very, very important topics. Good. Last but not least, cheating in games. So this is a little bit of a protection system. So do you know any any cheating methods within the game design, game development world? Speed hacking. What is speed hacking? Auto aim, yes. What is speed hacking? Moving faster than usual in MS. Oh, yes. That's absolutely true. Good. Using the drop-down console to increase the stats. So I give you a few ideas. Bots playing instead of humans, removing fogs. Yes, there we go. Okay, so there are a lot already which we sort of call unsporting play. So there is, for instance, boosting. Who already heard of boosting? Yup. So this means a little bit of that you have multiple accounts. And how can you detect this, for instance? Again, I'm getting ideas also from the chat. Practice of letting a better player farm your account, exactly, using multiple accounts. And yeah, you can check the stats, you can check different statistics like play time, ratings, exactly, high number of points in relation to number of matches played, and so on and so forth. Then the next one is disconnecting. This is, I think, something which, typical FIFA session, you're about to lose, you panic, and then you just disconnect. This is sometimes a rage quit, but on the other side, what is if the player really lost the connection? So how do you detect that? And what are countermeasures? So what you can do here, as a developer, again, feel free to add your ideas to the chat. You can give something like a disconnection penalty. So for instance, again, then saying, okay, this player loses points or anything. What if really the disconnection was a mistake, or I don't know, because of the connection? So you can give some sort of a disconnection penalty, see whether or not this happens more often. You can also add something like a disconnect delay. You can also, for instance, make the time until the player can start the next level or next section a little bit longer, and so on and so forth. Yes, and now you can also use AI methods to predict if it was intentional or not. There can be nowadays really done a lot with AI to see with patterns whether something was cheated or not. If the player was winning, probably not. But if yes, then we have rapid fire modifications. Who knows that? Oh, judging from the region, yes, absolutely, absolutely. Rapid fire modifications. What is this? I'll give you a hint on that one, which I always have in mind when I read about that. Um, just imagine, okay, this is a button, right? And I don't know if you watched this. There was this Simpsons episode eventually with this bird, which was constantly pressing one key. I'm sort of always thinking of that and have this in my mind. I'm not sure if anyone knows this episode. But yes, it's basically that with burst fire, single shot fire modes, that you have some modifications on your mouse, on your keyboard, wherever, that you can fire really quickly, way quicker than you're supposed to be. What could you do? Limit the rates at which a weapon can fire, limit or like make some pauses in between the sessions, and yeah, something like that. Again, all things you do as a game design aspect. This is nothing which you do like fancy cheating prevention tools. It's really game design choices often. Then we have environmental exploits. This can be, for instance, the application of an unintended feature or bug that gives player an advantage. You probably have to find that. You can do a lot with data analysis. So, for instance, if you find out that a player is always in this region and weirdly always at this specific stone, and then weirdly always winning and getting more and more points, there's a lot of things where you can work with data analysis here. Farming and stat padding. So this is achievements and rewards unlocked by defeating human enemies. Arrangement with others to win or lose to obtain achievements, for instance. What can you do? I mean, you can actually put things like these in the official game guidelines and the like legal description, what players are able to do or not to do. And especially this is something which is not nice if it's like getting achievements or some sort of tiers when real money could be traded in for this purpose or something like that. Yeah, what else do we have? There's more. Wait, there's more. Character sharing. Twinking. Who knows what twinking means? But it's not a lot. Do you those who do know? Do you want to share? That's that's a rare word. Okay, absolutely. Um, I'm sure if I tell you, you know what it is. But it's not as known as a word. I think this would be if you transfer gear for higher level characters to lower level characters. Ghosting. Who knows what ghosting is? Yes. World of Warcraft is making a low level character with maxed out gear. Yes. Ghosting. What is ghosting? Yes, maybe. So this would be that there are observers from different perspectives watching and helping the player. So for instance, I mean now with Twitch it's quite interesting as well, because if it's sort of live with just a few seconds delay, um, then okay, even like Twitch players can help, Twitch viewers can help. But sometimes again it's observers with different perspectives who just help the player in stream sniping. Oh yes. What you can do in games, again this does not help from streams. In streams it would help that the streamer sets a delay, that at least there needs to be at least a 10-second delay or something like that between stream and the actual thing being shown. In games, what could you do? Prevent the same IP address, for instance, where someone like remote desktop software as a workaround, something like that. But this is something which is a little bit difficult, and yeah, it's not rare. Then secret alliances. Again, we are all in unsporting behavior still. This is teaming, which could be unofficial alliance of cooperative play. Yeah, which is not so good in free for all deathmatch or last man standing modes. Observation of secondary communication channel could help. So if there is some third-party software, remote desktop for observation, to sort of check if they're talking to each other, like in secretly in the background, something like that. But this is something which is very, very hard to prove. Then we have scripting. This would be sort of the program or game feature to automate certain actions, bots, depending of behavior, it's cheating or not, and whether the behavior is replicable without the use of such script. So for instance, if it's such a fast firing rate, loading and stuff like this. So this is things you can look out for as a game developer. And the last one is stacking. Who knows what stacking is? This is also something which I would probably not know. So stacking would be that you alter the game settings or team lineups to give one or other teams an unfair advantage over others. So for instance, you put a team together only with pro players against a team with not so good players, or you create team size inequalities. So for instance, like 8 versus 10 players or something like that. Okay, so this was all a little bit which is labeled as unsportive play. So things which are a little bit in this gray area where you eventually have to set up rules for your game, where you provide those rules that players do know that this is not something they're supposed to do. Now we are in the area of bots and software assistance. And this is something which is often, which just can be really terrible and sometimes harder to detect, but super important to detect and to consider. So, aimbots, trigger bots. Feel free to add in the chat what you know about aimbots and trigger bots. So, this is basically often used in multiplayer first-person shooter games to provide a varying level of automatic target acquisition to the player, so that the player, like that you aim automatically. And the trigger bot would even go one step further and shoots automatically. The aimbotting relies on the fact that each player's client computer receives information about all the other players, whether they are visible from the player's position on the playing field or not. So, what you can do as a game developer, you can detect this by behavior, because from a perspective, from the spectator, this is a very unnatural exact position tracking, for instance. Then there's something which is called artificial lag or lag switching. With a lag switch, a player is able to disrupt uploads from the client to the server while the own client queues up the actions performed. So this is often that the player would gain an advantage over the player of other players. The opponents would slow down, stop moving, and this allowing, teleporting around, like in the chat. This allowing the lag switch user to really easily run around them, outmaneuver them. They sort of seem to be teleporting around. They are invisible or invincible. And yeah, this is especially bad in games that don't have much server authority. Yes. This is basically disrupting the network communication between a client and the server. This works by disconnecting cable or hardware switch. This is to the Ethernet cable. So consoles often have a built-in protection against lag switches in the form of voltage detectors, but then there are also software wireless lag switches. Those are, if no traffic is being received, most game clients and game servers will decide that a connection has been lost and will remove the player from the game entirely. So this is like a very easy but harsh way to just avoid this. But this is something which is a little bit difficult, but something to talk about. A so-called look ahead. I think we had this already in the very beginning. This would be in peer-to-peer multiplayer gaming architecture. The cheating client gains an unfair advantage by delaying their action to see what others player do before announcing their own action. So it's like acting if it's suffering from high latency. So the outgoing package is forged by attaching a timestamp that is prior to the actual moment the package is sent. This is, lockstep protocol. So this would require a player to first announce a commitment. So this could be a hash value of action, for instance, and this commitment is a representation of an action that cannot be used to interfere the action. And you can easily compare whether the action responds with a commitment. So it's okay in turn-based games, but asynchronous what do you do with first-person shooter games? This is something which is a little bit tricky. World hacking. This is, I think, something which we talked. This is often a third-party program that enables users to exploit bugs in a software to view more of a level than was originally intended by the game developer, such as the fog of war. So, for instance, the fog of war is this idea that you have this gray fog, like in Age of Empires, and you are not entirely sure where are resources, where's the other players, what are the other players doing. Yeah, but some programs eventually help you removing the textures or making it from solid to transparent, that you actually can see those occluded areas. Word hacking relies on the fact that on an FPS server usually sends raw positional information for all players in the game and leaves it up to the client's 3D renderer to hide opponents behind walls and so on and so forth. So this is quite interesting because, again, everything you trust on the client could be eventually worked with. So be really careful what information you are trusting the client with. And yeah, fog of war is a very nice way to hide view distance limits. Yes, true. Extrasensory perception. So this displays contextual information such as health, name, equipment, position, orientation of other players, and so on and so forth, which would be usually hidden from game players. This is often done by reading the program's memory with an external program or intercepting, decoding packages as they travel between client and server, or eventually reading memory array which contain information such as the player's position. This is something which is extremely difficult to detect and prove. And by the way, this is something which is important, detect and prove. Because of course, if you revoking the rights to play your game or kick out a player of your game who paid for the game, who was just in the middle of a session, I mean, you have to sort of also prove why you did that. Yeah. I think there are some implementation models. This is a little bit of out of scope for this course. But again, as we just mentioned, it is very important that you are very careful of what you send to the client. Never trust the client. So no information sent from a client should be accepted by a server if it breaks game rules or mechanics. And no information sent to clients unless it's need to know. There are again things like game code modifications. This is something which often are simply forbidden in the rules of playing the game. So if you create the game, especially a multiplayer game, you want to create such Eulers. Which include things like reverse engineering, the manipulation of game data files, and third-party protection systems should not be used, and so on and so forth. There are plenty of third-party software systems. Then system software modification. So this would be that cheats modify any underlying system components, for instance, graphic driver modification that would ignore the depth checking and draw all the objects on the screen. This is a very primitive wall hack. Things like these are just like very hard to detect. Then you have the packet interception and manipulations. So this would be that you manipulate the data in real time while in transit from server to client. This typical man in the middle attack, person in the middle attack. There are already existing tools and software systems which are very known to help protecting you as a player from cheating. So, for instance, the Game Guard, I think, is one of the most famous ones used in games like LA Noire. And this does things like hiding the game app processes, monitors memory range, blocks calls to DirectX functions, and so on and so forth. Quick question to the chat. Do you know any anti-cheating software systems? Do you know GameGuard? Punkbuster is another example. So this is also... Yes, Punkbuster. Vanguard. So Punkbuster, I think, is probably known from Battlefield, Far Cry, Medal of Honor. This involves real-time scanning of memory. What else? Status reports are sent to the Punkbuster servers by all players. The Punkbuster admins can also manually remove players from games for a specific number of minutes, permanently ban. The servers can be, there's quite a list of features it comes with. The Valve anti-cheat, I think this is what was the last one, yes. Valve anti-cheat for Counter-Strike, Half-Life, Call of Duty. So here, when the software detects a cheat on a player's system, it will ban them in the future, possible days or weeks after original detection. It may kick players from the game if it detects errors in the system's memory or hardware. No information such as the date of detection or type of cheat detected is disclosed to the player. After the player is notified, access to only the Valve anti-cheat protected servers on the game the player cheated in is permanently removed. So, there are plenty of interesting anti-cheating methods. Just to name a few, we already talked about many of them as we went through potential ways. So this would be, again, server design in general. Then ideas like software obfuscation, that you use non-standard formats. Okay, not good in standard software design, but again, if you use non-standard formats when you want to obfuscate specific parts of your game implementation. Encryption, of course. Then the player supervision, that you have spectator functionalities, that you can watch the players while they're playing, that you can support community reports. Data analysis and statistical detection, that you find anomalies in the player behavior automatically. Pattern detections. Sandboxing. So the sandboxing, that you sort of have like its own safe environment, which then can be used to prevent code injections, memory modifications, and so on and so forth. And this is something which I just need to point out there because this is so fun. So there are also very fun methods for anti-cheating, and in this case, piracy methods. So who has heard of the Game Dev Tycoon piracy method? Yes, some of you? All of you? No, almost all of many, some of you. Good. Half of you. Okay, good. So this is basically an anecdote. So Game Dev Tycoon is a game developed by two brothers coming from Graz. It's a very popular game, really, really lovely game. You can we talked about already about this game. And back then, when they released this game in, I think, 2012, 2013, there was this big issue back then that all the games got pirated all the time. So back then, pirating games was a really, 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 really big deal. And it was really hard for game developers to actually survive. Because on Pirate Bay and so on and so forth, you could just like download any game. And it was really, really hard for game developers, especially if you're a small developer and you might not have the resources for fancy protection systems. On the one hand, you might not have the knowledge. You are an indie developer, and then you put your game out there. Everyone loves your game, everyone plays your game, but nobody paid for it because they downloaded it for free somewhere in the web. That's not good. So the game back then also only cost $8, right? And still, so many people did not buy the game but wanted to run a cracked copy. And so the developer did something really smart. So remember, Game Dev Tycoon is a simulation game where you pretend that you are being a game developer and you're creating games. So it's a game simulation game, a game development simulation. And what they did, they created a different version of this game with one small thing. They create a version of the game where at some point of the game, nobody bought your game, your revenues were terrible because people were pirating your game. And then you lost immediately because you were running out of money. And this version of the game, they put on Pirate Bay themselves. So basically, they created a fake version of the game where people see what it means to be pirated. And people, and the fun fact is, what the developers say, that there were even people then complaining that this game is so hard to win because you cannot fight the piracy. And they were complaining that it's too challenging. And obviously, therefore, like saying themselves, oh, I have the pirated version, not knowing it back then. So this was super fun. Of course, got a lot of press coverage, and I thought like a very smart, very different version of fighting piracy, cheating, and so on and so forth. So this was a little bit of an anecdote in the end. This was today's lecture. Thank you so much for joining. There will be one last lecture next week. I hope you had a good start into in the beginning of the year. You are ready to finish this term. I hope everyone is safe. At the TU Graz, we are currently in a status traffic light red. So we try to make it as safe as possible, of course, for everyone. I will jump into Discord now. If anyone of you has any questions, also feel free to ask questions now in the chat. And if you don't have any questions here, thank you so much. The slides are not available on Teach Center, but on the website. Georg was already so kind to put also today's slide onto the website. If you go there and then, there you go. If you go here and you say courses GDD1, here's the schedule. And here is the security in-game slide set. And Georg was already so nice and already put the latest slides up there. Good, I think so. All the slides should be online now. Good, any more questions? Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening. Again, I'll quickly jump into the Discord voice chat if you have any questions you want to raise there. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.